For those of you who are joining in live time, thank you so much. And for all of the future listeners, thank you for your time as well. um, I see that we are a little bit past 4 o'clock Eastern time. So I'm going to get things started very quickly, and then I'm going to pass things over to Angela. But I first wanted to do a few things. Again, the first thing I wanted to do is just welcome everybody with peace and with love to a conversation about voting. We want to talk about how we're feeling about voting. Maybe some of you are new to voting. Maybe some of you have been voting for more than half your life, quarter of your life. It doesn't really matter. Wherever you're at with voting, this conversation is for you. We wanted to just give some context to some of the feelings that we are having, to be like, am I the only one who feels this way? To share, so that we can all know that we are in community together when it comes to this thing called voting. And today we have some really incredible people who will talk with us about various aspects of voting. Voting is our right. And at Food Recovery Network, we know that food is a right. And so we always want to intersect with the topics that as they relate to food. And voting is absolutely one of those things. So first, welcome with love and with peace. Second, I'm actually calling in from Philadelphia. And normally I am back home in the Washington, D.C. area where I pay tribute to the Piscataway Conoy tribe. And I did not have an opportunity today because I wasn't thinking I was going to be in a different city to do some research to provide to everybody about the ancestral lands that I am on physically today. So I still do want to give love to our ancestors and our modern day First Peoples, Indigenous peoples, tribes, bands, stewards of our land, our water, and our air. And I also wanted to say, another thing when I talk about, the Indigenous First Peoples who are here, what's part of our history. We also at Food Recovery Network, we talk about Black Lives Matter. And we will continue to talk about that. And we also talk about, ending Asian hate. And these are communities that when we think about how do we all want our society to live and to thrive, when we think about where are the groups that are marginalized, where are the groups that have been disinvested in, when we can say that some of these marginalized groups are doing okay because we collectively care about these groups that are marginalized, that are disenfranchised, that's what we're striving for. And soon enough, perhaps my opening words, what you'll begin to see, and I hope that you'll begin to feel, is that the words that our Indigenous peoples matter, our Black Lives Matter, we need to stop Asian hate, I hope you feel that is integrated into the full conversation that we're going to have today. That it's not just a statement that we say at the beginning to make ourselves feel good, that it is part of who we are, and you'll see that displayed in our conversation today. I wanted to just give a really quick introduction and how I know the three people who are joining us today, before I again turn things over to Angela, our amazing moderator for the day. So I'm going to start with Angela, Angela Lin, who has been, to introduce, by way of this important conversation we're having around voting, Angela is a Food Recovery Network alum, and I personally got to know Angela. I think, Angela, I would say when you were interning, at the particular company, if you want to share that, please do. And, it was an organization, a company that, didn't necessarily, it wasn't in the food business, food world, but you talked with me a lot about how they could be, and knowing that you'd come from graduating, being so active in your Food Recovery Network chapter, and then going into, the workforce and still keeping that tie so strong to Food Recovery Network. I want everyone to know, that's how I got to know Angela more over the last several years. And Angela is on our Student and Alumni Advisory Board, so has taken a very strong leadership position for Food Recovery Network. And I'm just so thankful and honored that Angela will be talking with Dominique and Tony today And Angela can give more introduction about her role in her day-to-day work, but some of the other passions that bring us all here together in community. So that's Angela. Um, from my perspective. Dominique, another one of our incredible voices that I'm so excited for all of you to get to know. Dominique and I met several years ago now. Dominique came to the Food Recovery Network national office, was a fellow with us when we had our fellowship. But before that, at her undergraduate, Dominique was also a fearless Food Recovery Network leader and helped bring Food Recovery Network to her school and worked very tirelessly about the issue of food insecurity, as well as other issues. And so Dominique came to work at the national office after having a perspective as a chapter leader and was with us for 2 years. And I've just stayed in touch with Dominique. Sometimes, Dominique, it feels like just yesterday that you were at the office, for that 2-year amazing fellowship. And sometimes it feels like it was over a decade ago. And Dominique has a really well, all three speakers today have such keen insights for all of you. But Dominique and I really, we talk a lot about leadership and what does it mean to be a leader. And when we think about where we're all at in this, exercising our right to vote, where does leadership come into that? And so Dominique has some really interesting insights that I'm so looking forward to hearing. And then Tony, everyone, this is Tony. And again, Angela will give more formal bios, but Tony and I met Tony via one of our powerful partnerships with Poor People's Campaign, and via Poor People's Campaign, the Cairo Center. Two really incredible nonprofit organizations, national nonprofit organizations, doing some really incredible work to activate and mobilize around ensuring that some of us who are the most marginalized, the poor and low-wage workers, making sure that their voices are heard, that we're not just a block vote, that once we vote, you get certain people into office and then we never get heard from again. The Cairo Center and Poor People's Campaign helps to mobilize, and together, FRN and Poor People's Campaign, we have a lot of aligned work that we're doing, including the fight to raise the federal minimum wage to at least $15 an hour, knowing that in many cities it needs to be much higher than that. And Tony's going to provide his perspective for all of us, going into a bit of the history of voting and how that translates into some of the actual physical feelings we might be having when we think about voting, and sadly when we think about maybe how difficult it is depending on where you live. So this is the incredible group that we brought together. I'm so thankful to each and every one of you. I might chime in as a resident older person on my experiences, voting and just my experience in some of the topics that we have, especially as it relates to economic security. How does voting relate to economic security so that we can support people to have enough economic security that they can obtain and access the food that they deserve for themselves and for their families. So maybe I'll chime in. But Angela, I'm going to let you take things from here. And again, thank you so much. And everyone, welcome. And I know we're all in for a really incredible conversation.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Regina, for the warm introduction and the invitation to be part of this very important conversation. Like Regina said, my name is Angela. I'm in Dayton, Ohio, and I've been part of the FRN network since my old college days in 2017, when I was part of the University of Michigan chapter, and I'm now so involved with the Student Alumni Advisory Board. And I was always really passionate about fighting food insecurity and food justice in general. Honestly, I thought after I graduated, I would end up doing communications for environmental or food justice nonprofit, and actually did a year of AmeriCorps Vista at a food bank here in Ohio. But I kind of surprised myself when I veered from that path and accepted a job as the communications manager at Ohio Voice, which is my current role. So Ohio Voice is a 501c3 nonpartisan nonprofit organization, and we're known as the Civic Engagement Table in Ohio, which means that we provide capacity building support to more than 30 progressive organizations doing grassroots work, civic engagement work year-round in underrepresented communities. And I have the great honor of helping our partners with their communications capacity. So So assisting with social media strategies, earned media pitches, messaging and narrative work, storytelling, all the ways that we are talking to and reaching voters across Ohio. So my organization is nonpartisan, as is Tony's and Dominique's, which means that we don't do anything with candidates. We don't support or oppose them. We focus solely on issues, and we're talking to voters about the world that they want to see based on their values. We don't talk to them about who to vote for. We're talking to them about why they need to vote, because, we want a world where no matter where we come from, what we look like, where we live, how much money we earn, our children can live fulfilling lives and be their authentic selves, a world where all of us can make the best healthcare decisions for ourselves and decide when and if to start a family, a world where we all make it home safe, a world that truly includes all of us, no exceptions. So we're having these conversations year round. It's not just when there's an important midterm or presidential election that we're engaging with these people. We're consistently talking to them and organizing with them and building power in these communities, especially since a lot of our partners focus on underrepresented communities that have historically experienced and still experience more barriers to the ballot box. So that means BIPOC voters, young voters, low-income voters, rural voters, voters with disabilities. We're helping them build this people power, which I know FRN has talked about the importance of in their movement, building this people power to enact long-term change. So, I'm fairly new to the civic engagement field and grassroots organizing and all these different issues, but I've really learned over the past year that there really is a lot of overlap between food justice and civic engagement, and between healthcare and honest education and LGBTQ plus rights and wages and public safety. There's so much intersectionality in all of this because the policies that affect our day-to-day lives really all lead back to the ballot box. So when we all vote and we vote for our values, and it's really our values that are on the ballot, it's not really the candidates, but our values and our vision for the world that we want to see. When we do that and we organize in disenfranchised communities and build power in them, and with them, we get them to vote and be engaged and to give testimonies and to run for office, and we make our voices heard. That's how we create a multiracial democracy that is more inclusive, more equitable, and more reflective of the values we want to see in the world, because our democracy is strongest when it includes us all. And that's why voting isn't a conversation that can wait until election day. It's a conversation that needs to happen every day, every year, because these issues affect us every day, every year. So that's what I do and why I do it, and my own personal stake in this conversation. And that's why I'm particularly excited to be part of this dialogue with these two amazing people and experts in their own rights, because I know I have so much to learn from them, and I'm sure you'll get just as much out of them as I will. So it is my honor to introduce Tony Eskridge. I just met him for the first time last week, and in just the 30 minutes we were together, I got to see and really feel his passion and excitement for voting and building power, particularly among poor people. And I just can't wait to hear what he has to share and be in conversation with him during this hour. So Tony Eskridge serves as the policy associate for the Cairo Center. He was born and raised in Memphis, Tennessee, and earned a BA in urban studies with a minor in political science at Rhodes College. Tony's work focuses on building relationships, sharing personal narratives, love that, and researching the true impact that interlocking injustices have on our society. Tony is currently based in Chicago, Illinois, and is committed to centering the poor, low wealth, and dispossessed in policy conversations and building a movement to end poverty. So over to you, Tony.
Thank you so much, Angela, Regina, and the Food Recovery Network. It's such an important topic, like always, but especially in this moment with the midterm elections coming up. And I just want to jump straight into it. We see the ads on TV, especially right now, all these politicians on both sides, especially right now, much of their messaging is around, you need to vote for me to keep that other party out of office. To them, it's like very partisan. It's like, what can I do to win strictly for the party? Like the party is like the most important thing right now. But when we look back and see what's happened across history, let's look at what happens when both Democrat and Republican administrations have been in office. The minimum wage is at its lowest value that it's been in 60 years. That's across Democratic and Republican administrations. Over the past 20 years, the US has spent $21 trillion on war and militarizing our communities in the world, Democrat and Republican administrations. And y'all especially know more than anyone, over 30 million people are hungry every year in the richest country on earth. Indeed, there is a lot at stake in this political moment right now. Christian nationalist politicians are weaving their hate into their messaging and policies. An illegitimately constructed Supreme Court has taken away our abortion rights and is threatening to take away even more fundamental rights. The climate crisis is worsening, and scientists are saying that we're running out of time. We must rise up to this political moment now, and we do that by building a sustained social movement and using this election season as an opportunity to organize. Now, if you're like me, you're probably tired of people telling you, especially young folks just need to get out and vote. And if everyone voted, we wouldn't be in this mess anymore. And I also don't want to make broad assumptions about folks' experiences. So if there's time later, I'd love to hear just like folks' reactions to hearing like just vote. But here's something that crowd and us, this is something that we all need to understand. It's not that we don't want to see change. Rather, this system is intentionally taking away our power to make us feel powerless. Now, something else we need to understand is that this attack on voting rights that we're seeing today is the largest attack on voting rights that we've seen in decades. It really is different this time. It really is, y'all. The 2008 presidential election, that was the most diverse presidential election in history. And immediately following that, wealthy elites and conservative politicians devised a plan to strategically finance campaigns and flip state legislatures in 2010. You can look it up. It's called Project Red Map, and it was extremely successful. And the following year, many of these state legislatures produced extremely gerrymandered maps, ensuring their victory in upcoming elections and their representation in the US Congress. In 2013, this is a really important Supreme Court case that folks should know. It was a decision from the conservative-leaning Supreme Court in Shelby County versus Holder. They gutted the pre-clearance clause of the Voting Rights Act. And for folks that don't know, the pre-clearance clause ensured that the federal government would review voting rights bills from states that historically suppress votes from marginalized communities, folks that Martin Luther King, the Freedom Riders, all the folks from the past, Freedom Summer, all those folks were campaigning against those states in the 60s and before. That pre-clearance clause was gutted. And within hours of that decision from the Supreme Court, states that were once covered by that pre-clearance clause were introducing restrictive voting bills. Within hours, they were waiting for this decision. They knew it was coming and they were ready, the opposition. And by the 2016 election, 14 states had new voter suppression bills. Now, between the Shelby case that I just talked about and another Supreme Court case, Brnovich v. Democratic National Committee in 2021, the key protections of the Voting Rights Act that Martin Luther King and others from the past were putting their lives on the line for, getting arrested for, many of those key provisions are now essentially like powerless. All of that fighting is essentially like all of those powers are now gone. Last year in 2021, 440 bills, voter suppression bills, were introduced across 49 states. 49 states. The way we hear the conversation right now is that it's just red states, it's just a Deep South issue. 49 states introduced these bills, and 19 states passed 34 bills that will impact up to 55 million voters in this midterm election coming up. These bills, I mean, we've seen them in our day-to-day life, their impact, but just to sum it up, many of these bills consolidate polling locations. They make it harder to register. They criminalize folks getting assistance to cast their ballot. They criminalize folks passing out water and food to people waiting in line. And the lines are already longer in the first place, folks having to wait hours to cast their ballot. Election day is still not a national holiday. And some of these bills take voters off the voting rolls entirely. From 2016 to 2018, for example, 17 million voters were taken off the voting rolls. Moreover, when considering the everyday policy violence that we face, it's undeniable that the wealthy and political elites are just straight up ignoring us. In the presidential debates, candidates are always talking about what they're going to do for the middle class to protect the wealth and the American standard, hardly mentioning poor and working class people. They never mention that. Not just the candidates, but even the debate moderators. They never ask questions directly related to poverty. Their approach to policy is top down. Their approach to policy allows 140 million people to be poor, low income, or one emergency away from being poor. Their approach to policy is to pit us against each other. And we know the narratives already. They say immigrants are taking our jobs. Young people are lazy. Poor people don't want to work anymore. That attacking systemic racism is too woke. And that poor whites are the de facto base of Trump's party. And we know that that's not true. With so many scapegoats and these voter suppression bills that act as obstacles to the ballot box, we as individuals can feel powerless when it comes to voting, and it makes sense. Now, despite the dominant narrative belittling our worth and saying poor people don't engage in politics and elections, we know the truth. The truth is we are political and we have power, so much power that the super wealthy and the conservative politicians that they have in their pockets are rushing these voter suppression bills to take that power away from us. To return to that idea of scapegoating that I was talking about earlier and the empire's tactic of division, we got to understand that voting rights are not exclusively a Black issue. Moreover, voter suppression isn't just an attack on the Black community. Voter suppression affects all of us, and it hurts poor people most of all. For example, Native tribes in states like Arizona, the Dakotas, Montana, New Mexico, places like that, many folks have to travel over 100 miles, and in some cases 200 miles to get to the nearest polling place, 200 miles. And when there's no same day voter registration, they may have to make that trek multiple times just to participate in this process that's been made difficult for them intentionally. There are over 5 million currently and formerly incarcerated people with felonies, disproportionately poor people that have had their right to vote taken from them. The over 700,000 people living in DC, majority Black and brown folks, still have no representation in Congress and receive no federal funding. More examples, since 2012, Texas has closed over 750 polling places. People are standing in line for hours, and couple this with Election Day not being a national holiday. If you're a low-wage worker, you shouldn't have to decide between voting and making sure you get your whole paycheck. Georgia's governor race in 2018, a lot of us may have seen it because it got a lot of national attention. But at the end of 2017, over 560,000 voters were taken off the voting rolls, the largest single purging in US history. Who knows how many of those folks couldn't vote in that election because of the rampant voter suppression in Georgia and this single purging. But that's why we as individuals must organize ourselves and build a movement like the Poor People's Campaign. We can become a new and unsettling force, as Martin Luther King has said, and transform society. Now, to back this up, this idea that we can be this new and unsettling force, the Poor People's Campaign produced a report called Waking the Sleeping Giant, and it looked at the power of poor and low-income voters in the 2020 election. And we found that poor and low-wealth voters accounted for nearly a third of the electorate in the 2020 election, a third. And in battleground states, that number was even higher, in some cases over 45%. We know that when engaged, and emphasis on when engaged, poor and low-income voters turn out in high numbers. The campaign conducted voter outreach drives in 10 states in the lead up to that election, and it had major impacts. For example, in Georgia, in the 2020 presidential election, 39,000 non-voters from the 2016 election voted in the 2020 election because of our outreach. That number was 3 times higher than the margin of victory in that presidential contest. Now, we can't say for certain which party these people voted for, but what this shows is that when engaged, emphasis on when engaged, because that's not happening right now. When engaged, poor and low-income voters can have serious impacts on elections. And I'll close with this. A president is not going to save us. The Supreme Court and a congressperson, any of these elections, a single election is not going to save us and change these conditions. We hold that power, and we must use these elections to organize ourselves and our communities, not around candidates or a party, as Angela was saying earlier. It's not about that. It's about organizing around our demands, because that's what a vote truly is. It's not an endorsement, it's a demand. Arguments to keep one party out of office aren't good enough anymore. We live in abundance. We see that. We don't live in this scarcity. We demand an end to poverty now. We demand to live in a society where everybody has a right to live, and our children inherit a planet not destined for climate disaster. And if our politicians don't hear our demands, we will continue to organize and build the power to vote them out. Social movements like the Poor People's Campaign are working. The 2020 presidential election saw the largest voter turnout in history. Social movements, voter registration drives, and engaging with poor and low-income voters are responsible for this. We are powerful, and collectively, we are stronger than the forces working against us. Now we have to be strategic. The end goal this season is not associated with the candidate. It's about politicizing our conditions and putting forward our demands. We have to know what obstacles are in our way from registering to cast a vote, and we have to make sure that the people around us have a plan to vote. We have to have these power building conversations like this one on these calls in our workplaces, at school, in our families especially, because when we unite, the demands of the people will not be denied. And as we say in the movement, forward together, not one step back. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Everything you shared, it's so great. And I learned so much. Something that particularly resonated with me about your point about how voting is hard and there's so many barriers to engagement, that these voter suppression attempts are in fact intentional. I love that I don't love, but the fact that you brought up gerrymandering and redistricting, because that's something that in Ohio, we've particularly struggled with this year. Under this election, we are voting under unconstitutional maps because the people in charge of drawing our maps could not follow the Ohio Constitution. They could not follow the orders of the Ohio Supreme Court. So that's something that we are really grappling with in Ohio. And I could go on about gerrymandering in Ohio, so I won't. But I will just say that you're so right in that that's just another tactic that those in power are using so that they can dilute the votes of Black and Brown voters, of poor people, so that, when we say your vote counts, every vote matters, in reality, that's not really the case when, districts are rigged so that those in power stay in power. So all of this just to kind of echo those comments, but also to reemphasize that, those feelings are valid, feeling discouraged because of these systems set up in place. And, it could be easy to, give up on our democracy as a result, but our democracy isn't something that you can give up on. And I love that you're talking to poor people to show them that, there are people and organizations that believe in your values and your ideas and your power. And, this process may not historically be designed for you, but you are now part of this process. And when you engage and start organizing and building power, so that the whole community is engaged, that's when we can start redesigning the process and having a say in how we have a say, because our vote is our voice, and when we amplify our voices together, we can make it so that we are truly heard. So really appreciated the points that you brought up, and also that you caught out the scapegoating attempts that those in power are using to control the narratives. We really need to come together, because again, that's how you build power. So before I introduce Dominique, I just want to open the floor to her to see if anything resonated with her from Tony's comments.
Honestly, much of it did resonate, but I think the point which kind of ties into how I'll be speaking is the power that young people have when it comes to casting their ballot. A lot of times there's the idea that young people are apathetic to the voting process, especially college students, when the case is there are a lot of barriers in place to them getting to the ballot, whether it's being from the state of Tennessee and then going to college in Michigan and navigating voter registration deadlines and requesting your absentee ballot. So it's a matter of kind of understanding the landscape and assessing from there, because there is great opportunity to make an impact so long as you're aware and prepared. So that's how I'm very excited to kind of continue on. But thank you so much for sharing all of the history of voting with us, Tony.
Amazing. All right, so now let's continue with Dominique Mitchell, who I will personally say has been such a role model or mentor to me personally during my time as an FRN student, and even to this day, even if she doesn't fully know it. When I got my interview with Ohio Voice, I actually called Dominique because I was like, hey, I know you went from FRN and food justice stuff to civic engagement work. I may be doing that same pipeline now. Do you have any tips? And she gave me some great insights into the landscape and this work. So here we are. Dominique, it's an honor to be with you again in the space as comrades in this work now, and thank you for helping me be employed. But I digress. So Dominique Mitchell currently serves as program coordinator with Civic Nation's All-In Campus Democracy Challenge. In her role, she works with a portfolio of campuses throughout the Southeast and supports a cohort of historically Black colleges and universities, or HBCUs, to institutionalize nonpartisan democratic engagement. Outside of her job, she enjoys discussing political history, baking allergy-friendly desserts, and raising an amazing little human. So over to you, Dominique.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Angela. It's always inspiring to hear how I'm able to inspire others and be a leader, because it's something I very much pride myself on. I'm very excited to be here today to think about the student voting landscape. That's the bread and butter here. And as Food Recovery Network's kind of audience includes students, I really want to take the time to kind of highlight ways that you can be prepared to cast your ballot on election day. I know as someone who, my first time voting was in the 2016 election. It could have been 2014, but I was not prepared as a student from Massachusetts who went to college in Florida. Missed out on voter registration deadlines. Nobody was talking to me about it. And it was kind of concerning because colleges and universities have a duty to make a good faith effort to ensure that students have access to voter registration materials, so on and so forth, due to the Higher Education Act of 1965. And so organizations like All-In Campus Democracy Challenge came to the scene to provide structure, support, and recognition to institutions as they're working to increase their civic learning, political engagement, and voter registration among their students. And to get a better idea about the data, in 2020, as Tony mentioned, we saw record level of voter turnout among the general populace at about 67%. And in 2020, among colleges and universities, that was also almost on parity at 66%, which was an increase from 2016, and that's data from the National Study of Learning, Voting, and Engagement, also known as NSOLV, out of Tufts University's Institute for Democracy and Higher Education. So a mouthful of words, but in those places, campuses are able to receive kind of tailored data for their institution regarding voter registration, voter turnout, and depending on how much information they're sharing with the National Student Clearinghouse, these institutions can also receive kind of the race data. So how are their students dating across the different races, from Black students, our Latinx students, our Asian American Pacific Islanders. And they're using this data to hopefully close those gaps in voter turnout and voter registration. And so we're seeing institutions are doing really well when it comes to students registering to vote. It's a matter of finally getting out the vote, ensuring that they're actually casting their ballots on election day. But in this case, because as Tony mentioned, and we've seen throughout, like, there are long lines on election day when it comes to casting ballot, people staying in line for hours. And so organizations like mine and others are promoting people to be #October voters. So making a plan to vote early. So this Friday, the 28th, is actually vote early day. So if you have the time to find your early polling location, do turn out to vote early so that when election day does come around, you're not trying to figure out the last minute, like, oh my goodness, how am I going to cast my ballot? Because a lot of times we're finding with students and even other demographics, life is just busy, life is hectic, and it can easily voting can easily slip the mind, even though it shouldn't, because voting it's a way of life. And one of the ways that people can be prepared is to kind of research your ballot. At All In, we have a free tool, a one-stop shop called allintovote.org. And there you can check your voter registration, you can research your ballot, which I think is very important as someone who's in a state that has some interesting ballot amendments, one of which is to remove slavery from the Constitution, except in terms of like folks in prison, they can still work. You know, there's some progress being made, but more progress can be made given that we shouldn't be having prison labor in that way. Because I know it's intimidating showing up to the ballot box. I voted in the primary to the primary, and it was about 4 pages long. And yes, a very long ballot, a lot of positions where I thought I was as prepared as I could possibly be, and still I was coming up short. So it's really important, in my opinion, and hopefully to be a confident voter, because yes, the idea of just saying go vote may not be serving the purpose that we hope that it does, because it's causing more harm than it is good. Because I may not be a person who's turned off by a bad experience, but for some it could be traumatizing or just feel yucky, in which they're like, I may not do this again for a primary per se. They'll show up for the general election, but it's very important to participate in your primary elections. So allintovote.org is that one-stop shop sort of place for you to check your registration, learn what's on your ballot, find where you're supposed to vote on election day. And what's really cool is that you can print out your selections for what you have on your ballot, so that when you do show up on election day, you're even more prepared. And within that, we're working with 950 plus colleges and universities to support this work. As Angela mentioned, I work with campuses throughout the South. And as you can see, there are different attitudes around kind of voting and how our campuses should be engaging, because this work is meant to be nonpartisan. Our institutions are working in a nonpartisan fashion to ensure that all candidates' ideas and things are being heard, because the goal is to be educating students on their rights, which one is to vote. And in that, I am working with the campuses throughout the South, making sure that I'm continuing to kind of share the resources of kind of the different organizations that are on the ground, those state tables, to work with campuses. And some of the challenges that we'll find are kind of communicating the moving target of registration deadlines. Like today, we have quite a few states that have voter registration deadlines, where like South Carolina, Oklahoma, quite a few others. I don't want to just be naming off and be incorrect, but I know there are quite a few that are coming. And as we continue throughout this conversation, I hope folks are checking their registration to make sure that it is as correct as possible, because it would be a bummer to try to show up on election day and things not be where they're supposed to be. So please, please check out your voter registration. And for our leaders in FRN who are at the many campuses, hopefully there's overlap and you can get plugged into these nonpartisan voting coalitions on campus, because our institutions are always trying to find different ways to engage their student populaces. So I'm a proponent of the intersectionality of voting, and of course, food justice, food loss, climate justice, because we do know that people can make personal changes in their day-to-day lives, but a lot of times the waste that's being produced and the emissions that are coming from really need some policies in place, and the folks who do that are our elected officials. As Tony mentioned, a president isn't going to save us. The Supreme Court, they have the influence. All voting is local. That is an organization that you could kind of tap into to learn more about local politics, but that's where the rubber meets the road. So your mayor, your county commissioners, or city council people, depending on how your your city government is structured, they're the people who are going to be making the decisions that'll impact you tomorrow. You're going to feel it right away, and then it kind of grows from there with your county representatives and your state representatives up to your governor, because they're the ones that are like taking care of business at home, and then it trickles down into the folks in Washington. So ultimately, especially for our college students, you have to make a decision of, do you want to vote where you go to school? Because some people do have the privilege of changing their voter registration to the state with which they're schoolized. I had the privilege of doing that in Florida from being from Massachusetts. Or if you have full allegiance and you're like, I'm going back to my home state after this kind of season of my undergraduate career, my graduate career, you can continue to vote at home. And it's just making sure that you're aware of deadlines, what's on your ballot, and how it can be impactful. And for our students who are not eligible to vote given their kind of citizenship status, whether they're non-citizens, DACA, or just kind of like permanent residents but don't have access to that, I encourage you to be an advocate to your friends who are eligible to vote, to maybe if it's voting on your behalf, like we found that has had an impact on with campuses engaging their non-eligible voter students, because we do know that, like, yes, voting is important, and we're kind of having this conversation around those who can vote, but a lot of the decisions that are made have been highly impacted towards our folks who cannot engage in the democratic process. So taking the time to be inclusive in our work, but also ensuring that, like, all the parts of the campus ecosystem are engaged. So I'm saying all that to say, it's all right to feel overwhelmed when it comes to voting, because I'm sure you're probably getting text messages. A lot of text bankings are happening of like, are you showing up on election day? Do you have a plan to vote? Are you registered to vote? And I know 2020, I participated in those. I know some of those I'm going to be texting people this Friday to remind them to vote. It's okay to be overwhelmed. It's okay to ask the question, why is this even important? How is this impacting me? I hope that in those moments of question, you are reflecting on everything that's going on. There are the ones that make the headlines, but maybe you're voting for clean water. Maybe you're voting for access to affordable childcare. Maybe your vote is around safety in the schools. It's not always going to be what people are maybe sits at the top of someone else's list, but what is on your list is also important, because it ties into the greater fabric of what we're doing, and everybody's voice must be included to ensure that, all things are considered, no one is being left out, and we're making the best decisions, not the best, but the most equitable decisions for our communities that meet the most need. So thank you, and I look forward to engaging in the dialogue some more.
Thank you, Dominique. Yeah, everything you said was just so important. And I think, the more young voters realize that their vote truly matters, the more they can join the fight to really create a world that reflects these values. And I'm in Ohio. We have a Ohio Voter Rights Coalition, and we had a call earlier, and we were talking about all the barriers that students are facing, especially when it comes to voter IDs, and just the confusion around like how do they vote if they didn't update their address on their voter registration, and just all these barriers. And we were just trying to get out all this information to make sure people are informed. But I think it's just so important that, we really do our best to, minimize and eliminate these barriers in the first place, so that voters don't have to sit down and spend 10 minutes just figuring out how to vote, or that they feel scared about not voting because they don't want to vote at the wrong place and then have this whole thing become a thing. So it's just so important to make sure that, especially with young voters and students in mind, that we really make sure that they feel empowered and encouraged. They don't feel discouraged to vote. But I think with issues like student debt relief coming up, I think young voters are starting to realize that, these elections directly impact them, and the people we vote for and the issues on the ballot can help improve our lives drastically. So hopefully as more young voters realize that, they'll start to be more civically minded and engaged, and truly believe that their vote matters. I also just want to emphasize your point about voting down ballot and just the importance of those local and statewide races. We don't have a president on the ballot this year, but while that's important and good, it's really the local races and the local elections that have the the biggest impact on your day-to-day lives. So really making sure that, yeah, you're researching your ballot, go to the link that Dominique referenced to, research candidates, learn about the issues on your ballot, so that you can be an informed and engaged voter. Tony, I'll open the space up to you to see if you want to add anything.
Yeah, for sure. Just such great insight and knowledge that you have. Thank you for like sharing all of that. And to echo something you were just touching on, Angela, yeah, the emphasis on thinking local and participating in like local processes and elections, like super important. And especially the way I think about it, being organizer and thinking about how do we like unite, like keeping it local and thinking about what's happening like in our community. Like that's a huge opportunity to like organize, like thinking about what's impacting folks in different neighborhoods, like how we may be blind to like what's going on like in a different area, like by like having the power building conversations where it's like, hey, the election's coming up, like what's most important to us upcoming, like having those conversations, building a united front, everybody in, nobody out, is like so important. And even like on college campuses, like you were also touching on it, just the importance of for voters right now on their mind with like student debt. So many folks who are working in like 20, 30 years into the workforce still have student debt. But, especially folks like on college campuses right now, like thinking about debt, like I think about like the Debt Collective and what they're doing like around the country to like organize people and say, hey, this election's coming up. And yes, Biden did this little relief, but we know this is a drop in the bucket compared to what we really need and what they've already done for the wealthy elites in the past and like what we demand. So I don't know, any chance to like organize, have the conversations about what's going on and create this united front, like that's what it's all about.
Yeah, for sure. And then going back to the point about local races, just really quickly, I think it's also like I just learned recently through my work that, we have state Board of Education, and we have a whole map for that with districts, and we elect members to the state Board of Education. And, the people in Ohio, they're at the Board of Education level, they're trying to pass some really harmful bills that like I wouldn't have known about if I wasn't tuned into this work. So there's a lot going on that you may not know about. And I think it's also okay to be open to learning about those positions. Like there's nothing, I think voting, is it's a learning experience. You learn about these different roles. It's never too late to vote for your first time. Don't be like, oh, I didn't register right when I turned 18, like why vote now? You could be 50 and vote for your first time, and that is still as impactful and important as if you voted right when you turned 18. So it's keep learning, keep being engaged, because there, again, like so much changes, and it's just really important to really have your ear on the ground and to be informed and engaged as much as you can.
Yeah, I'd like to add, because you had said something, Angela, of goodness, I lost it. But the point is, here it is, when you are voting, depending on your stage in life, there are different kind of issues that are present. A lot of like young people, especially folks in college and maybe kind of still in grad school, they tend to be renters. And when you are a renter, your local politicians really aren't engaging with you because you're not seen as like that target demographic, whereas like homeowners have a different level of engagement from political parties because they have a different stake in the community. Whereas like as a renter, you're likely to come and go. So I say that to say, kind of get in where you fit in. The school board, you may feel like, I want to be able to vote for that. But if you don't have children and they're not going to school, you may not be able to become as informed on kind of the policy positions or what is happening in the schools, because like I said, you don't have children and you're not sending them to the schools. But as someone who might be commuting every day in the community, or you're riding the city bus or the metro or what have you, there are folks that like that is their job. And if it means just focusing on that one topic and you become an expert at it and you educate others about like, we could be doing a better job the Green Line in DC could be running every 5 minutes instead of every 9, and we need to organize around that. So it's like understanding your position, doing a landscape analysis is something we ask our campuses to do as well. Like, what is your campus landscape looking like? Is it a highly residential campus? Are most of your students from the state? How are they engaged here? Are they mostly athletes? Are they mostly Greek? Like, take stock of where you are in the world. And if you have friends that are on this journey with you, partners, friends, wherever it is, the people in your circle, start there, and then you're able to grow and build community that kind of ripples out into kind of the broader reach.
Yeah, for sure. Relational organizing is really where to start. You don't have to go out canvassing for a candidate or anything. You really just start talking to your friends, your family members, your neighbors. Really getting those conversations going with the people that you're closest to is just as important. Yeah, for sure. All right.
Angela, could I jump in real quick? I was just loving all of this. I had to jump in. The three of you all touched upon something that I wanted to pull out in the latter part of the conversation, and that is around the word coalition and the concept of coalition building. And I just wanted to pull that out a little bit to see if the three of you could just talk about what that looks like as an individual voter, what that might look like in other identifiers that you have in terms of being a voter, having a particular affinity group or a particular area of our life that really matters to us, A. And B, can we talk a little bit about, and again, the three of you in your own ways brought this out, that the process isn't perfect. You might do all the research in the world and, oh my God, there's something on the ballot, like I didn't know who was running for XYZ thing. It's not always going to be completely perfect. And Dominique had mentioned that, you might care about something that maybe isn't a buzz topic for a particular person running for office. You might really care about waterways, but only, other topics are being discussed. But you can still find out, where that person stands on topics that are of importance to you, whether or not that is a buzz topic or not. And I wanted the second part of my question was maybe to have you all respond to, what does that feel like to you when you're voting for somebody that, you might not have the same response for every single thing on a ballot box or within a community, but there are enough things that you would like your elected official to move forward on. How does that feel to you to not have all of the things that you want, but you have some of the things that you want in a particular candidate? I just wanted to, hear from you about that. I'm being greedy with 2 questions for all 3 of you.
So I would say for your first question on building coalition as an individual, that's it's interesting to look at it, but I think the folks you spend the most time with can be your coalition, because depending on, everyone's in a different lane, living life, checking things off of their boxes, and you kind of learn the different struggles or the successes, and maybe even within those struggles and successes, there might be some external systemic barriers or what have they. You can find community and hopefully be able to discuss, politics and policy with those people. I know sometimes, some friend groups, they don't even do that at all. But I would like to believe that if you're spending time in making community and building family with folks, that they would have your kind of best interests at heart as well. So that's one place to build community, but then also a coalition, but also tapping into the organizations that kind of builds in. Like, some people are active members with the NAACP, the League of Women Voters, and other sort of organizations that can help you to be with like-minded individuals who are very seasoned, sometimes very seasoned in all things voting and policy, civic engagement, so your peers, organizations. And then your second question on not having the perfect candidate, I think that's something that I've been learning as time goes on from my first experience voting. Like, you're not going to get a perfect match for what you want and believe in. And that's where individuals should kind of have a priority list of like, what's most important when it comes to what you would like to see happening in your community. And sometimes the thing that is most important on their list is not on that politician's like radar, but there are other pieces. And then I think the individual has to determine, is it worth it or not? And sometimes it is. And there's the possibility of then after you cast your ballot, being politically engaged by writing letters, calling their office, because it goes beyond like, I've just cast my ballot. Now you need to call them and like become regulars. Because as a former senator's intern, you can call the office, you can write them letters, and you become a regular. And when those relationships are built, you can sometimes be invited to speak at a town. Yes, become a regular. You can see like their town halls. They'll send you calendars for the new year. Like, what's this one? She did that for me, and like my mom and others, because when you're engaged and they know who you are, they're like, I need to make sure, I'm checking in with my all-star constituents, because they do value that. Because if you're like, I'm not here for this, it could have a ripple effect on their success in the future.
I can add a little bit. Agree with all of that. I think to answer your two-part question, when it comes to like coalition building and where you are as an individual and the whole ecosystem of things and finding your place and all that, I think just place matters. And a lot of times like where you are and like what the community struggle may be, or even your own like lived experience, like what are your experiences, what are your passions, where do you want to like join a fight in, and like building that community. And sometimes like place influences that. I think about in Memphis, I'm not there right now, but always claim it. And there's a huge fight there right now around the Byhalia pipeline. It's a crude oil pipeline cutting through a predominantly majority black and brown neighborhood in South Memphis. And I don't know, maybe that wasn't like a major topic of interest for folks, but given this like new decision, like because of place and history, like that becomes like where you like find your people, and that like becomes the struggle. But also connected to that, at this point, like the conditions are so bad, and the glaring problems are so systemic, that all of these issues are interlocking, as we say like in the Poor People's Campaign. And he may be a part of one coalition, but it's so important now, especially now, to see how everything is connected. I don't know, FRN, we talk about hunger, food insecurity, like that's like so connected to income and welfare rights. That's so connected to public transit access. And we think about education, like there's a whole segment of students that are homeless, like that's connected to the housing struggle, that's connected to the hunger issue. Like all of these things are interconnected, and we're not even getting to like global capitalism and like the food economy there. It's like everything is interconnected. So we may be throwing down on like one thing in particular place like matters, but and it's important to like really throw down on like what's most important to you, but making those connections and showing solidarity when you can. Yeah. The second part, sorry, and I know we're like reaching time, so I don't want to talk too much. I was like, what's that second part of the question? But yeah, talking about a candidate not having everything that we believe in, which oftentimes it's like kind of it's like kind of regular at this point sometimes, where it's like someone doesn't have everything that we're advocating for. But I don't know. That's why I think it's just like important to reemphasize that it's not about the candidate. It really is about like the demands, and as Angela said, like the values and like what we want. And if we make the end goal not like making sure a particular person like gets into office, but if the end goal is how can we like organize our community and build the power so that they have to come to us, and like our demands can no longer be ignored. Like when that becomes the end goal, we're on a whole different timeline. Like it's no longer about giving money to a particular political candidate's thing and then he continues to run every 2 years. It becomes like, how are we like investing in our community, making sure we have the resources, making sure that we're organized, we're mobilized when something goes down, we're educated on the issue that matters the most to us, and that we exercise our power to vote in this and every upcoming election.
Yeah, for sure. I don't think I have too much to add. Dominique and Tony did a great job covering most of what I was thinking. But yeah, I would just add for like the coalition building aspect. It really goes back to kind of the values that are important to you. Coalition is really about kind of going like a shared purpose, moving toward a shared vision of what you want to see. So once you really tap into kind of what are the values that you want to see in the world, and then you can start finding the groups, the people, even if there's not a formal coalition yet, your neighbors, your community members that share those same values. That is kind of how you can get started. The kind of what Dominique was saying, you don't have to build a coalition from scratch. There are all these amazing orgs in place that can really get you tapped into kind of what you are passionate about. Kind of, no, I won't go there. And then the second part of your question, Regina, is really interesting to me because I think that's something that I'm really personally dealing with in Ohio. I won't name names, though you could probably easily do research, but there is a Democratic candidate for U.S. Senate in Ohio who has not just it's not just that he doesn't share some important kind of agenda items, but it's that he's like actively harmed the AAPI community with how he's been campaigning. So that's something that I've had a lot of conversations with my AAPI community comrades, is like how this dissonance that we're feeling of like, we have to vote and we have to protect democracy, but how can we vote for someone who has harmed us and won't recognize that harm? So I won't get too into that because that's kind of partisan, but I think that's an interesting dilemma that I think a lot of people feel with, not just AAPI voters, but no matter what identity you feel with and no matter who your candidate is, that is very much a reality. And I think that goes back to Tony's point about how we really have to organize within our communities to make our demands heard, so that we can enact change and talk to politicians to get them to recognize their harms and to change their positions, and to really kind of influence them so that they are not harming their constituents, but representing them kind of fully. So on that note, I will start to wrap up, but thank you, Tony and Dominique, for all of your comments and insights that you've shared, and for answering the questions. So it's been really great. Like I said, I've learned so much. I knew I would. So really appreciate your guys' time, and I'll pass it back to Regina to finish us off.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Angela, for being such a wonderful moderator for the conversation and really making it feel just like that, like a conversation. I know that I echo, I've learned a lot for myself, and I'm looking forward to, hearing from others, what you learned today, what piqued your interest, what resonated with you. Where do you want to continue to learn more based on what you heard today? We have 3 amazing leaders, 3 amazing voices that can help you in our pursuits to being a voter, and how we show up. So Angela, thank you so much. Echoing the thanks to Tony and Dominique. And behind the scenes, I also wanted to thank Kimmy Kutzler on the FRN team. Thank you for making this so seamless. So much shout out, to Kimmy. This is such an important topic, and we had a conversation leading up to this public conversation, and Kimmy, I want to say sometimes the things that we work on in our day jobs, it's hard stuff. At FRN, we are working to to ensure people get the food that they deserve. And that sometimes it can feel hard when we think about our right to vote and all the impediments that are there. That can feel hard. But Kimmy, thank you so much for adding so much levity to all of us coming together as we organized, with the logistics to make this conversation happen. It's really, it's so important on how we do our work, and you do that so gracefully. So thank you for your time, everyone. The link to this conversation will go live soon. We'll make sure that it's on our website. We're going to put it all of our social media. Please share this widely. We know many, many more people need to hear from the voices today, from Angela, from Tony, from Dominique. So make sure that you come back to the website. We'll share it, spread it all over the place. And in the meantime, plenty more ways to be involved with Food Recovery Network. Please get to know the organizations that Angela, Tony, and Dominique represent. We'll also share the links for the resources that they shared during this conversation too. Everyone, be safe and healthy. So many deep breaths as you need them. With love, with peace to all of you. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to more conversations to come. Have a great night, everyone. Bye-bye.